Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the political situation, particularly following the recent spate of arrests, notedly that of the former Prime Minister Shahid Khaqan Abbasi, what it means for the accountability process and also what it means for the opposition, which is categorically now, building up its cries of there being a one-sided accountability process. Where are we going towards that as far as our government, our government structure is concerned, as far as our assemblies are concerned, particularly as we move closer to the Chairman's Senate no confidence also. What it means for the future of politics, for the future of legislation. Let's talk about that. We will also be talking about the tribal areas and the fact that they're going to make history with the first ever set of PA polls. We'll be talking about all of that today. I have with me Osama Khilji, who's a columnist and writer. Thank you for joining us today. Javed Jadoon Saab, who is a political analyst. Thank you for your time. And Saeed Moazzam Hashmi, who's a senior analyst. Thank you for joining us today. Moazzam Saab, let's start off with you. As far as the political scenario, it's not, you've seen the way things are happening, following the whole tape scenario, where the videotape scenario. Now, with more arrests, we've seen the former Prime Minister Shahid Khaqan arrested. And now, even Miftah Ismail, who's also, an important part of the PMLN, his, arrest warrants were issued and he's on bail. So how do you think the situation is looking? Because the opposition is now building up its volume of saying that there is a one-sided accountability process and look, we are being targeted only. Where are the other names that were supposed to be, accountability was supposed to be across the board, and the government continues to assert that. What do you think?
Let me start with the upside first.
Right.
Okay. The upside is that it's good to have accountability. The system should be transparent. It's public money which is being used. It should be held accountable, and nobody should have a problem with that. Right. And this afternoon, Prime Minister reiterated his stance on accountability as hard as ever. He said that he's not going to give up because that's what he was waiting for 22 years, right, which is a good sign. All right. Now, when we talk about particularly Shahid Khaqan Abbasi, despite that he's a sophisticated person, no doubt, but everybody is accountable. It's not just the LNG case which is being hyped, right, which is being investigated right now. When he was in charge of National Airline, his personal airline was booming and National Airline was nosedive. Okay, so these are the things, and one should not be afraid of it. Although all politicians generally have a lot of skeletons in their closet. So, but this
and
is
a lot of those people may now be in the PTI also.
Yeah, exactly. I'm coming to this thing.
Right.
So now, why this individual is being singled out? Other people were there. So,
you think there is a singling out?
Yes.
You think
I'm coming to that. Just give me 1 second. Now the downside. So now the downside is that opposition parties think that they are being singled out. Singled out that then in a couple of cases you see the Dari Saab's name and Frayal Talpur's name, other names were coming up, but nothing big created. It's more focused on PMLN. It seems that it's more focused, and that's what people are talking about.
But the opposition is saying that it's more focused on the opposition as a whole. It's not only saying that, so much that, of course, the PMLN is
the main one
facing the brunt of it, but there's also the PPP, which is a part of the opposition, of course.
So what actually happening is that what opposition is playing is that opposition is blowing its trumpet, beating its trumpet, and trying to make a hype that they are being targeted. Right. And this is not the only opposition which is saying that. Whichever opposition is in the process, in the system, they always say that, and because that's the part of the political game, right? Now, what the government has to see that whether they are pursuing a balanced approach or not.
But Hashmi Saab, isn't it true that the government asserts on the one end that they're not the ones who are actually doing the accountability process, and independent NAB, the National Accountability Bureau is. But it becomes problematic, don't you think, when they want to take ownership and yet they back away from it?
The point is that we do say that okay, our institutions are independent, but
Right.
generally it doesn't happen. Your institutions are not as independent as they are supposed to be,
Right.
and this is the phenomena which prevails all through the developing world. So we say that, but you do assert influence on it, because
Right.
you know government have all the government, not this particular government, all governments have their mechanism, and that's how they assert it.
Right, let
and,
me come
and
back
this
to
is what
I'm
the
going to go
opposition
to-
is trying to
Ji.
take it.
I'm going to go to Javed Jadoon Saab. Jadoon Saab, we've had this discussion, you know, a number of times with you. But following these recent arrests, what do you think? Do you think that there is, you know, according to, you know, Hashmi Saab, he's saying that there is, you know, always a certain degree of influence that the government of the day does assert over these, you know, like for example, NAB is concerned. Do you think that's true?
Thank you very much. I think, first of all, we need to understand the whole process of accountability in Pakistan. I think you raised a very important question, that whether it is the job of the government to conduct the accountability process or the job of the anti-graft watchdog, which is the NAB in Pakistan. I think as far as institutions are concerned, let us not cast aspersions on institutions. We need to begin from somewhere.
Right.
The accountability process used to be very murky and very muddy business in Pakistan in the past.
Right.
And now, once again, political parties and their main leadership, those who are being held accountable for their actions and deeds in the past, are definitely talking about the kind of a witch hunt which is being carried out by the government, by the
Right.
sitting government. I totally agree with you that the government, it is not the business of the government to conduct accountability. When you have an independent and an autonomous organization, a watchdog against corruption, let them do their job.
But
I
do you
think
think
the
it's
problem is
becoming-
rising because, as you also pointed
Right.
out, that one day they say that it's the government which is pursuing the accountability process.
Right.
And the next day they say that, no, let us clarify. We are not the ones who are doing that. In fact, it is the job of the NAB, and this is what NAB is doing. Now coming to reality, accountability must be seen to be above the board as well. In any society, in any country which claims to be a civilized society, accountability, I think, should be the integral part of it.
Right.
Starting from top to bottom, it shouldn't be the other way around. In Pakistan, it has started from the top, and it should go down to every tier of the society, and every segment and every section of the society as well should be held accountable for the past deeds. And
Right.
the government, the sitting government, also has certain people who are being investigated. So I think, first of all, we must understand that it is not the job of the government to conduct accountability process. NAB is an independent organization.
Right.
And the chairman of the NAB has a security of tenure as well, 3 years time period.
Ji.
And he can only be removed through a constitutional process. Otherwise, it is not the discretion of the sitting prime minister or the president to dismiss or dislodge the chairman of NAB. Now, the accountability itself, that was your question. The former Prime Minister Abbasi was arrested on the charges of misdeeds as far as the LNG negotiations and the conclusion of the project was concerned.
Right.
Maruk, I think when you talk about accountability, it must be seen to be transparent as well. There are certain issues with the NAB structure as well.
Do you think
Every political party agrees that we need to revisit
Right,
certain
and-
rules
and
and
PTI
regulations
also
as well.
agreed with
and
that.
even PTI agrees with that.
Ji.
So I think the kind of discretionary powers being enjoyed by NAB chairman
Right.
are so vast and so huge
Right.
that they can put behind bars any person without being investigated. Now the question of the merits or the demerits of the case, we sitting here, we really can't judge the
Right,
Prime
but
Minister, the former
institutionally-
Prime Minister,
right.
unless and
Unless
until
we have,
the
some
courts,
facts or
the
whatever.
courts are the right platform.
Right. But
and when it goes
institutionally,
there.
Javed sir, but institutionally, of course, we need institutional reform across the board also. You know, there's no doubt about that. If we pick up any institution, unfortunately, in our country at this point, we will have to agree that it needs an overhaul. And you're right, NAB may be the top of the list. But do you think part of the problem is also the ownership, taking ownership and then, shying away from that, which is what the government is doing?
I think they shouldn't be taking the ownership.
But they want to take, but the Prime Minister
That's the problem area.
has...
When you take
he stands for
responsibility, then I think
accountability.
opposition would be justified in alleging that it's the government behind the accountability, one-sided, as you said in your intro.
Right.
They would be somewhat justified in alleging that it is the one-sided accountability process, and they may even call it a witch hunt against the opposition figures, important leadership of the PMLN particularly, and to some extent Pakistan People's Party as well. I think now, in my personal opinion, first of all, government should detach itself from the accountability process, and they must do it in a very visible way and in a very emphatic and categoric way that we are not part of this accountability process.
Right.
It is the watchdog, the anti-graft body, NAB, which is responsible for this exercise.
Right.
Secondly, I think less statements would be more prudent on part of the leadership of the sitting government, because when we issue statements and you issue controversial statements,
But-
it really, Maruk, it really makes the whole process a bit controversial
But
as
when
well.
you've
And this is
come
what has
into
happened in
power
Pakistan.
because of accountability, when you say that we stand for
You
accountability,
have to say it again and again.
then you have to assert that, we stand for accountability, which is what the Prime Minister is doing, and the fact that you are where you are because there has not been accountability for the last, some 60-some years.
Maruk, favoring accountability and, as you said, coming to power on the basis of their promises and commitments to the people of Pakistan, that accountability or anti-corruption drive would be their main pillar of the policy. But saying that they are behind the accountability process is another thing.
different. You're saying
they
they
need to differentiate
draw
between
the
that.
distinction, you're saying,
They
make it
must do
clear.
that. Otherwise, the
Right.
controversies will never end and the whole exercise will become really, really muddy.
Right, I'll come back to you. Osama, what as a columnist and as a writer, what do you think as far as, if you look at the political scenario at this point, what do you think of course there's the credibility issue that the opposition is raising, and then the government has to balance that with the accountability. How do you think they're going about it? Do you think they're going about it the right way?
I think if you look at the current scenario, there's almost 11 lawmakers that are in prison. There's
Right.
including a former president, 2 former prime ministers, and like you pointed out, they're all from the opposition party.
Right.
So I think we need to take a step back and really consider who really wields power in Pakistan in the superstructure of our country.
Right.
And if you also look at, say, past presidents that are, say, guilty of high treason, where are they? Are their cases being pursued? Are dictators being tried? So I think these are also questions that we need to look into when we look at the greater justice system, because if there's justice for some, then is it really justice? Because justice by definition is supposed to be equal, and it's supposed to cover all individuals. So I think there's an obsession in Pakistan with corruption of politicians and only politicians, and not other power players such as, say, bureaucrats or even people in the judiciary or otherwise that wield a lot of power and are definitely also involved in corruption. If you
Right.
look at in Pakistan, anything you have to do with a government office, there's bribery involved. Is there action being taken against them or not? We don't see that. Right? So it's really cosmetic on the face of it. And when you look at things like you brought up the Senate chairperson controversy
Right.
and the opposition's mobilization in order to de-seat him, and at the same time you see this witch hunt against the opposition picking up pace, then obviously it will seem controversial. And when the PTI has come to power on the banner of accountability, but their own leadership is not being held to those standards,
Then these issues will rise.
Then these issues will rise, and then the opposition has a legitimate reason to cry witch hunt in this case.
Right. Osama, do you think that the fact, of course, it's, the no confidence is looming right there. It's right there. And do you think that things are picking up pace, which the opposition is asserting? like Osama is also saying, do you think links will, further pick up pace? Because there are rumors that, even the opposition is saying that the Shehbaz Sharif might be next. There is, a whole list of other members of the PMLN that may be arrested. Do you think, how true is that
Yes,
in your opinion?
the vibes are the same, and there is some truth in it that more people will be picked up, and this will in fact strengthen the slogans of opposition, because it will create a sympathy weight.
Particularly closer to the Senate no confidence.
Exactly. So it will create a sympathy weight for opposition. And what government needs to do is that, bring out some people from its own cadre, try them.
Even if they're not, even if,
Yeah.
I mean, they have to find corruption within themselves.
No, but they don't have to find it. Everybody knows that who is who and who is not.
Right.
So we all know that. So what need to do that is pick out some of people from their cadre and also try them. So this will create a balance. Mere statements won't make anything.
Right.
You have to show people, because the reason is that with our accountability, is not just the accountability, but the other processes, elections also we'll talk about later.
Right.
So there is a issue of trust, and the issue of trust is based on a good historic track record, that where trust was breached, and for X number of reasons, nothing secret about it. So this has to do. So they need to try to create some kind of a balance, so people would understand that, okay, now you are not for a witch hunt, you are really mean transparency to be properly installed. This is, I think, in my humble opinion, government should be doing that, and this can reduce the pressure which is being mounted from the opposition
And also,
side.
we have to talk about this, Jadun Sahab, as far as the optics of it is concerned. I guess, it would perhaps, deal with the optics of this situation if the government were to start looking at, people within their own ranks. That is true.
But Maruf, we need to understand that those who remained in power for the last 10 years, or in fact for the last 3 decades, you really can't compare the two. The
Right.
government, the PTI government is in power for the last 11 months, and they were in power for the last 3 decades.
Right.
It becomes very natural for any accountability organization that they would like to look at the past governments which were in power for 3 odd decades.
Right.
And now comparisons being drawn between those who remained in power for the last 30 years and those who are in power for the last 11 months would be very unnatural. So I think time will come. When they are in power, they will definitely be held accountable in future when there are any wrongdoings, anything which comes up to the eye of the NAB or accountability process. I think that would be the kind of a legitimate process. Otherwise, creating a balance for the sake of balance would be, I think, would be really unjustified. And secondly, I think leadership of the two political parties,
But
whatever
Javed
they are
sir,
alleging.
You're right about the fact that, of course, one can't compare apples and oranges, and of course, the government of the day has been there for a very short span of time. But there are a lot of people within this government that have been part of politics in other political parties, maybe,
Yes.
and that one cannot deny also.
Yes, I agree. And I think some of them are already on the radar of accountability organization, NAB.
Right.
And a few have been picked up and released as well on interim bails or whatever.
Right.
And there are some other individuals as well. I think I strongly believe that in the coming months, definitely there
will be
would
more-
be certain people from the ruling party, and they would be held accountable. And but I would
Do you
still
think the
say
pressure
that
is building up closer to the?
if
to
you
the
look
no
at Maruk, if you look at the statements being issued by the leadership of the two main opposition parties, they are basically saying that the certain individuals from PTI should also be arrested and put behind the bars, just to create an impression that it is across the board accountability process.
Right.
Otherwise, they're not rejecting the kind of charges being leveled against them. And I think that's the catch-22 situation.
But the former
If you
Prime
don't
Minister
reject-
is categorically rejecting the charges against him. They're saying there's a videotape. They're saying that the whole process has been tainted.
I think a videotape issue has already been taken by the two courts, the Islamabad High Court and the Supreme Court as well.
Right.
It would be sub judice to prejudge because even in our last discussion, Maruk, we were talking about some kind of forensic examination should be conducted into the
Right. videotape.
videotape
Yes.
issue.
Yeah, that
Because
was done, I
unless
guess.
and until it is done and officially something comes up, it would be premature to say whether the videotape issue was the genuine issue or not, or the tape was doctored or the tape was genuine. Since it has been taken by the court, something will come up, and ultimately I think court will give a ruling as well. And if the ruling comes in favor of Mr. Nawaz Sharif, I think the courts are themselves responsible to grant them some concessions. Otherwise, government really can't do anything.
But
It
Javed
would
Sahab,
be
the assertions made within the video and following that are of course very difficult to prove. That also is a fact. I mean, if you
But
talk
Barak, once
the
again-
assertions made by the learned judge himself following the claims of Maryam Nawaz are themselves, allegations that are very difficult to prove.
And these are very serious allegations as well.
Right.
Maybe difficult to prove, but the allegations themselves are extremely serious.
Right.
And they cast shadow over the transparency in the court system as well. And it really demands that we need to revisit the judicial reforms as well. But
Right.
now the issue is whatever has to be done will have to be done by the courts themselves.
Right.
It is neither the government's responsibility nor it is the responsibility of the people concerned, like Madam Maryam Nawaz and the judge concerned of the accountability
But do you think the pressure is building up closer to the no confidence? I have to go to Osama, but before that, do you think that's
Are you talking about the
no confidence in the chairman of
Senate?
Senate? Do you
Chairman
think
Senate.
that it's building up the pressure, which is what the opposition is asserting?
But I think there could be two versions about that.
Right.
The one version could be, if you look at the whole situation from government's perspective, I think they believe that the pressure is being exerted on the government only because the opposition wants some concessions as far as their cases are concerned.
Right.
While the opposition claims that it is their
Right
constitutional
to-
duty and
right.
is part of the democratic process that you can table no confidence motion against any sitting individual, and there's nothing wrong in that. But I think it is simply like rocking the boat at this particular juncture. And apparently, Marak, there's no reason and there is no apparent cause for dislodging the Senate chairman. His conduct, in my personal opinion, was pretty good, and it was above the board. And opposition never had any difficulties with the sitting Senate chairman. They never had any complaints against him.
So it's really just politics.
It-
Or pressure
pri-
tactics.
Prima facie. I think at face value, if you look at it, it definitely seems that they are putting pressure on the government.
Right.
And maybe, I'm not sure, but maybe aimed at seeking some concessions from them.
Right. Osama, as far as, the political scenario is concerned, we'll know in a couple of days what happens with the chairman Senate. If it backfires for the opposition or for the government, how do you see things?
I think we need to take a step back and look at how the opposition's really been treated lately, right? So apart from these results, I think what's very, very controversial and what is something that everybody needs to be talking about is just the blatant censorship that is happening of opposition leaders, and how many instances or the interviews of opposition leaders not being aired on TV, and channels are not being allowed to, journalists are not being allowed to interview so many opposition leaders such as Zardari or Maryam Nawaz, and I think that's really compromises our democratic legitimacy of Pakistan. But as far as the chairman Senate, no confidence is concerned, I think the opposition has the numbers in the Senate to do, as Jazim Saab mentioned, play their constitutional duty of de-seating him and bringing in their own person. But I think if you
But
think
other
about
than send a message, it doesn't really do anything, as far as technically speaking, other than send a message to the government that, well, they have the numbers and therefore can wield a certain amount of power, it doesn't actually achieve anything.
I think it does achieve a lot
Really,
politically.
how?
So if you look at how the chairman Senate elections and Senate elections themselves took place last year, I think it was a very controversial process
Right.
in which the PMLN's leadership was delegitimized, and then the PMLN senators could not vote as PMLN, and they had to vote as independents. And we should understand how that was done and how the chairman Senate was brought in. But I think the opposition also has to flex its muscles and show the government that the government cannot act whatever way they want. And in our National Assembly, in our Parliament, and with the Senate, there is an accountability measure there. So every bill that the National Assembly takes has to go through the Senate, and over there we know that the opposition is in lead in the Senate. So for them to assert their influence over there, I think is an important message when you look at the democratic
Right.
dynamics of how the system works. So I
But
think
they
in
have the numbers anyway, even if they don't change the chairman. I will come to you. Ji, Hashmi Saab, do you agree?
Yes, exactly. Basically, it's for the political optics.
Yeah.
Simple as that. It's for
Right.
the optics, and if
To prove that
to
they-
prove that, and also
wield a certain amount
if
of power.
Senate, if opposition succeeds in what they are pursuing for, they will actually dent government's confidence. This is what their objective is, and across the board in the national politics, if they dent it, it's kind of a big victory for it.
But you think, right,
Nothing
but do you think the
material.
government, if the government loses, it's still, it doesn't impact them
No,
so
just
much.
like Osama said, it's not going to make a big
Make a
change
difference.
on the checkerboard.
But on the other hand, if the opposition loses, they do lose face. and
They do lose face,
so it-
exactly.
so
Yeah,
take-
it's both for them. The checkerboard is both for them. Whoever would checkmate.
So there's more
but it's for
pressure
the
on the
political
opposition than there
optics.
is.
Yeah, it's for the optics. Yeah, nothing.
Of course, the government also, has considerable leeway as far as, being the sitting government of the day,
Yeah, exactly. It does.
trying to conduct, their
Yeah.
own. Do you think that what do you think? What will happen?
Well, frankly speaking, the way other things are,
Right.
the government has been conducting, and the masses and general perception is growing a bit. I would say rather cross with what the government step is taking, which are the
Right.
good steps. But people
So
are
you
not
think it
happy.
might be difficult?
So it might be difficult and
Right.
might go a little bit against government.
Right.
Yeah.
Gee, Javed sir, let's forget the chairman Senate elections. It'll happen, whatever happens. As far as you were talking about institutional reform, and that has always been a huge part of this government's agenda also. Do you think we're maybe moving away from these goals when we perhaps go too much in one direction? Or do you think, of course, considering the fact that the government has only been there for 11 months and they've had to deal with the situation with the economy the way it is, I guess, we can give it more time, we can hope that it will get to it. How do you think?
Just would like to add a few words to Senate Chairman, and then I'll come to your point, which is
Right.
an important point. I think it would be very unfair to say that, and I really don't agree, that if government loses, it would be a dent for the government, because the numbers are heavily in favor of the opposition.
Right.
It is a known fact. And government knows that the combined opposition enjoys majority in the Senate. And by any standards, they should win, and they should be able to dislodge the sitting Senate chairman. If in case they are unable to do that, the opposition, I think it is going to be the opposition which is going to receive a heavy dent in their credibility, because despite the fact that they have got the numbers game in their favor in the Senate, and if they are unable to do that,
Right.
unable to achieve the task, I think that is going to be a dent for them, not for the government. If government loses, that's a foregone conclusion that government can lose and could lose. Now coming to your point of the structural reforms in Pakistan, I think other than accountability, PTI government strongly believed that the only way forward was to reform the institutions in the country.
Right.
Whether it is the judiciary or the bureaucracy or the other important structures in Pakistan.
Right.
And but I would agree with you that one reason they have not been able to pursue it very vigorously is because they were so deeply involved in reviving the economy
Right.
and economy was taking really heavy tolls on the people's daily lives. And
Right.
even today, the people are facing difficulties, high inflation rate, unemployment, and the rising prices of daily consumption goods, etc., and the rising prices of petroleum products as well. The depreciation, we have seen unprecedented depreciation in the value of rupee. These are the main, I think, important factors which consumed much of the time government spent on addressing these important vital issues.
Right, right.
But having said that, they really can't go on and continue to sort of give excuses that they were not able to do that because they were involved. I think you can do certain things in a parallel manner as well.
Especially because this government, historically speaking, is one of those governments where, you know, our military leadership, our government, our judiciary all seem to be, you know, working in harmony. They all
Yes,
seem to be,
absolutely.
you know, are on one page.
And absolutely, I think it's a very, very important point you have raised, that in the past, the governments always claimed that due to certain difficulties from the establishment, they were not able to run the state and run the affairs of the government the way they wanted to run. This current government has claimed not once, many times, that the establishment, or you call it army, or you call it security establishment, they are on the same page as far as domestic issues are concerned,
Right.
as well as the international affairs are concerned. The national security issues, the war on terror, the foreign policy, the economy, and even they have inducted the sitting army chief in the advisory council or advisory committee as well.
Right.
So I think it would be extremely difficult for them to wriggle out in future if they're unable to deliver on these areas,
Right.
the areas of reforms and reviving the economy. I think they would have little argument in their favor, and it would be extremely difficult for them to defend their position. It is about time, Maruk, that they should look towards reforming the institutions. If they don't do that, the problems will never go away. You can't put these issues under the carpet and you can't continue just like that. For example, the issue of Senate chairman and the issue of accountability process, everything can be revisited. You can invite everyone in the opposition is not a bad guy. There are people, they could be in the sitting government, they could be sitting.
But to be fair, Jadoon Sahab, the opposition also has to agree to play ball.
They
and
must,
it doesn't seem to.
I was coming to that
In
point.
a single word, bemused. It's bemused. It needs to come out of it.
I was coming to that point, Maruk, that it's not only the government which is responsible to take the country out of the problems or the myriad of issues which Pakistan is faced with today. Opposition should come out of this syndrome of being witch hunted or being victimized. And I think they can cooperate and coordinate with the government on various issues, right, while they can maintain their position as far as the accountability process
and focusing
is concerned.
More on, you know,
unifocal
working
approach,
for the people.
Unifocal approach of the opposition is not really good for the country.
Which gives credibility to the narrative of the government,
Yes,
that they're
absolutely,
only pandering to their own leaders.
And most importantly, Maruk, the people of Pakistan are not buying that, what opposition is telling them. And I think they should understand that unless and until you have the support of the people of Pakistan, you really can't claim. You can't even bring 10 or 15,000 people on the road as a part of their agitation process.
But there are rumors that might happen now.
But if it doesn't happen, just in case, because now ifs and buts. If it doesn't happen, I think then the opposition's credibility as far as a popular force, as far as the combined opposition, I think every single opposition party is united on one platform against the government.
And yet, if
it is PTI versus the entire political structure. So even then you are unable to bring the people out on the street against the government on the basis of they being victimized and they being witch hunted.
Then it means
I think
you don't
then
have the
they
support.
lose the steam and they lose the credibility, whichever is remaining.
Right. Unfortunately, you know, I want to move on because we don't have, you know, a lot of time. Osama, let's talk about the elections in the tribal areas. You know, that certainly is a huge, as far, you know, as a you know, momentous occasion for us also. How do you see it?
I think, like you said, it's a historical moment in you know, Pakistan's history, especially for the tribal districts. It's only been a year that FATA ceased to exist, and the 7-8 agencies were merged into Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. and hence now we have provincial elections for the first time. It's only been a couple of decades that have only had elections for National Assembly seats
Right.
also. So I think it's a very exciting moment for the residents of the tribal areas. I was in touch with a lot of friends and locals there. And they're saying there's a lot of young candidates in this election, so I think that's something interesting and notable. And
First-timers.
for the first-timers, yes, there are some candidates that are 24 years old, 25-year-old. And interestingly, there are also 2 female candidates that are, running for provincial assembly elections in the tribal districts, and one of them also happens to be in her 20s. So I think that's also a very welcome and positive step. But as far as campaigning is concerned, that is happening, but I think there are some issues in some tribal districts, so such as in the Waziristan districts, there was a curfew for a long time, and there's Section 144 enforced. There couldn't be any political rallies. So I think that was not a very good decision when you have elections coming up and when you have contestants in there. But I think from what I've gauged, there's a lot of independent candidates that are very popular as opposed to candidates from political parties. And as far as political parties are concerned, I think the PTI seems to be quite popular in the northern districts, so that's Pajawar, Orakzai, and Khyber districts. But in the southern ones, you have other parties, and then also you have with 2 lawmakers in jail, Mohsin Dawar and Ali Wazir.
Right.
There's a lot of sympathy for the PTM, and then their candidates such as Hayat Preghal, from what it seems like on ground in Waziristan, are quite popular right now. So I think it
So you think
remains
there
to
can
be seen.
probably a divided sort of result?
Yes, I think it will be a divided result, and especially in the southern districts, the government might not do as well. But then there's also JUIF and JI that are quite popular, that do a lot of work.
Right.
But the reason the independent candidates are very popular is A, because they're very wealthy, and B, they're able to do a lot of social work because of their wealth.
Right. We've
And that
also
draws,
we've been joined by Rahimullah Yusuf Sai from the PTM. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
How do you see the way things are shaping up in the elections? What do you think? What are we looking at?
I think that, we are seeing the strengthening of the political parties in FATA. This was not the case earlier. Independents used to be elected in higher numbers. And in the
Right.
last election for the 12 seats of National Assembly in ex-FATA, we saw that all those elected, they belong to one or the other political party. So this is something to be welcomed because the Political Parties Act was extended to FATA in 2011. And since then, the political parties have been actively trying to mobilize the people and, get their support. Secondly, I think the people of FATA, they will be getting more representation now in the democratic institutions. They're already represented in the National Assembly and the Senate, but now they will also have representation in the Provincial Assembly. And I think after this, there will be local government elections. So, in fact, the people of FATA are, getting opportunities a lot to vote and to exercise.
Do you think there's more independent candidates rather than there's probably a direction as far as the independent candidates, more first timers, independent candidates like we're in the studio we're hearing Osama Khilji say. Do you think that, or it's more party focused?
There are about 285 candidates. All the political parties have fielded their candidates. The PTI is leading with 16 candidates on all seats, and the JUIF on 15 seats. But there are, independents. There always are independents contesting elections in Pakistan, especially in the former FATA.
What about young people, first timers?
Yes, but I think independents do not have much of a chance in the presence of political parties. So, we have to see as to whether any independent can win this time. But last time, they were all defeated, and only those supported by the PTI with 6 seats, JUIF with 3 seats, People's Party with 1 seat, and PTM with 2 seats. They were elected. So, Let's see, but I think political parties have become really strong in the former tribal areas.
So you think that, there may be, but other than that, as far as this move is concerned, this is certainly historic for Pakistan. The tribal areas will be becoming into the main fold now. That itself stands as a huge achievement. Isn't that true?
Yes, I think that is true because they will be now better represented. In the past, we have seen that their representatives were not up to the task. They were actually working for their own interest. Right. Now, if they are part of a political party, they would be under some kind of discipline, and hopefully they will also be trying to look after the interest of the voters. Also, I think, to mainstream FATA, it was important to give them representation in all the democratic institutions. We are already seeing that the courts are now functioning in FATA. The police is also working in FATA, and more resources have been made available for development and reconstruction activities.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Javed Saab, of course it's a huge move and we talked about that. But as far as the security situation is concerned, Osama also talked about an incident there. Do you think it will help that also? Because of course concerns will now be aired better by representatives and all of that.
Absolutely. I think it would definitely help address this particular issue. There can't be two opinions that it is good for democratic process in Pakistan. It is good for the tribal areas being integrated into the mainstream life. But I think most importantly, it would help address the violent extremism which remained the hotbed in these particular areas.
And it's of course been one of the parts of the National Action Plan. So from that perspective, it's a huge
this is more important than any other. I think the positive things we have been talking about, because once you integrate these areas with Pakistan, you can kickstart a very fast-paced process of development over there. And I hope that with the political process, the development process also takes place in tandem, and we are able to bring about socio-economic changes over there so that we are able to provide them jobs, better education and healthcare. I think this is a way forward for integration of those areas and fighting any kind of violent extremism as well.
Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Osama Khilji. Thank you for your time. Javed Jadoon Saab, thank you for joining us. Saeed Muazzam Hashmi Saab, thank you for your time. As far as the political scenario is concerned, of course, as the opposition continues to cry foul, in the next few days we'll know how much power they really wield and how much of a power show the upcoming no confidence as far as the Senate chairman is concerned, and how that will shape things. Let's hope for the best. Let's hope that the representatives of Pakistan who sit in the assemblies can concentrate on the problems of the people who voted them in, rather than just politicking, so to speak, just showing power shows between the government or the opposition. They can be more focused, more centered on the issues of the people that they represent. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.